This is Mrs. Berklet, and this is our second lecture online, and it's Origin, Purpose, Value, and Limitations. And we're going to talk about it as a way to evaluate sources. We're going to call it OPVL, so you're going to hear that a lot in class. We're going to take you through both the rubric language that is on the test and also what questions you're going to be asked. So here we go. The first piece is the origin, and what you're looking for there is where and who did the source come from. Who's the author, what country were they in when they wrote it, how old were they perhaps, what their authority is. All that information is going to tell you something about the source. It's going to give you information that's going to both show you how it's valuable and how it has limitations. And you're going to want to double check those things because it changes. If the source is written by, like I say myself, Mrs. Berklet, history teacher, and I'm writing an article about quantum physics, it may not have as much meaning as if I'm writing an article about the Civil War. So we want to make sure we look at those things. The rubric languages identify who wrote it and what is their authority. Again, who is it? Who's the author? Fairly simple. What gives them the right or the power really to write this information? What type of source is it? Is it primary? Is it secondary? Is it an opinion piece? Is it a book? Is it a journal? Is it a letter? That's all going to change kind of the value and limitations within the article or the source, but it's also going to give you some insight into what the purpose is or why it was written. If it's a letter, obviously the intended audience is the receiver of the letter. If it's an opinion piece in the newspaper, the intended audience is whoever's going to read the newspaper. And then when was it written and where was it written? That's going to change things, giving you a time frame of did it happen like right after the Gettysburg Address, or did it happen 10 years after the Gettysburg Address, or did it happen 100 years after the Gettysburg Address? And then where was it written? Was it written in the United States if we're talking about the Civil War? That's going to give it a different, kind of a different background than if it's written in England about the Civil War. So there's that. So the questions you're going to be asked, and I'm sorry that it cuts off here a little bit, but who is the author? You're going to be able to find that in the information about the piece. It should tell you who the author is by name, but if you can't find it, there should be something like anonymous letter, but gives you some background about who the author might be. So tell me everything on the test to help you with that piece, but also, again, you want to look for who is the person that wrote this. What is the author's authority? What gives them the power, the permission to write about that source? That should be in there as well. It may not come out and say the author's authority is, but you're going to have to make an inference, like what they did in the past or what their personal background is. That might help you. What's the title? The title is going to tell you a lot, hopefully, about the source. What type of source is it? Is it a book? Is it a letter? Is it a journal entry? Is it an opinion piece? You're going to want to know that. When was it written? What time frame? Like what year? You should know that. That also is going to give you some insight. It should give you a background. Hopefully in history class you're learning a little bit about those time periods, so you can say, hey, something was written in 1861, first year of the Civil War. There's going to be something in there. There might be something about that source. Is it primary or secondary? And again, primary is written at the time, secondary is written after the fact. That's going to give you different insight. If it's somebody that's living it, breathing it, that's going to give it different value and limitations than somebody that 100 years later can use a whole bunch of sources to research that same time period. So you want to keep that in mind. And then finally down here, and again, I'm sorry you can't really see it, it says where was it written? That's going to give you insight. Is it written in the place that the history is happening, or is it written somewhere else? And that's going to give you insight into the value and the limitations. Sorry if I'm overusing the word insight. I'll try not to this time. Okay, the next piece is purpose. Why was this written and for whom is it written? You want to be thinking about that. What is the author's intent? Were they trying to get you riled up and excited about something? Were they just trying to inform you? Was it a way for you to change your mind or sway you? Was it an argument? What was it? So the rubric language, you demonstrate a strong understanding of why the author created the source and the intended audience. Big deal, the intended audience. That might change a lot about how you write. Think about your own personal way. When you send a text message to mom, it's going to be a different information than when you send a text message to a friend. So you want to be thinking about that when you're reading this information. Who is the intended audience? It's going to be totally different based on those, I'm sure based on those two things. So the questions directly from the test, why did the author write this source? Again, it should tell you, but you might have to make inferences. You might actually have to think about, shocker, what the author's background was. You might have to think about what the topic is. That might tell you. You can't just kind of guess on that. Sometimes it's not going to tell you straight up. And then who is the intended audience? not write history students that are reading this in Ms. Berkelow's class. You are not the intended audience. As much as you'd like to think that you're the intended audience of every primary source written, when the person sits down and writes this, they're not thinking, one day Ms. Berkeley will have class and they'll be reading this for a test, so don't put that in there. But really think about it. It's a letter. The intended audience is going to be the person that's receiving it. If it's a newspaper article, the intended audience is the person that's receiving that newspaper. Not everybody. Not everybody in the world receives the Tacoma News Tribune, so you want to think about that. Who is a regional thing, so you want to be having that in mind. If it's speech, political speech, who is the intended audience for that? So you want to make sure you know. That's going to lead to values and limitations of the source. Which brings us to value. This is key. It's a big deal when you're thinking about value. All right, so why is this an important document? Well, to me, almost every historical document is an important document. Some are more so than others, but we're looking for value within it, and we're looking for value in 2 ways, and I'm going to share that with you. The rubric language offers a valid response with 2 or more accurate and relevant values of the document. You've got to be able to come up with 2 reasons why this document has value. You're going to ask yourself 2 questions, and it's going to be actually divided up in a chart on your test, but without the chart or without the test, you still want to think about these 2 things. The first one is, what about the content or the information that is written in the source is valuable when studying this part of history? So when you're looking for value, you're looking for things like quotes, numbers, statistics, things like that that are going to give you relevant facts about what is going on. You might not see that, it might not be in there, so you might want to be able to pull out quotes that you find, put quotes around a passage from the reading, and put that in there and say, this is valuable because, and you want to tell me. Again, remember, you and I don't think alike, thank goodness, and so you want to be able to tell me what to think about the source. Don't leave me guessing. Don't leave me saying, I'm not sure, because if I have to guess, it's not a 4. And then the second question, which trips up most of my students, is what about the origin and purpose? So what about the 2 things that we just got done talking about? The type of document, the author, when it was written, who the audience is, etc., makes this information valuable when studying this part of history. So if it's something written in the Civil War by Abraham Lincoln, that's going to give it more value than if it's something written by Joe Schmo in the Civil War. So you want to be thinking about that. So who writes it, who wrote it, or when they wrote it, all that stuff is going to tell you. So pull that information out of the first 2 sections of this OPVL and throw it in there and say, hey, the fact that the author lived through this time period gives it value because, and tell me. Don't assume I'm going to know, because remember, we don't think alike. So that's value. And then the next part, probably the most fun part for all of you, is you get to look at limitations of sources in history, because who doesn't like to sit there and look at a historical document and say, haha, that's wrong, or haha, that's not as important. So we're looking for this. So what is the limiting about the document? And again, the rubric language is just like the value. So it offers a valid response to 2 or more accurate, relevant limitations of the document. So you're going to do 2. You're going to ask the same questions. What about the content is limiting? Does it not have any statistics? Does it only give one perspective? If it uses quotes, is it only using quotes from one section? Now on your test, you're only going to get a small cross section. But if you think about this when you're doing research, you want to be looking at it like the whole source. So if I'm looking at it like a 5-page source and it only has quotes from one perspective of the time period, that's a limitation to me. It tells me that I better go find some other sources and use that for my research. And then finally, what about the origin and purpose, the type of document, the author, when it was written, who the intended audience is? How does that give it limitations? If it is a topic that is a historical topic and it was written at the time period, it might have limitations in the sense that it's only one perspective, or they don't have the research that we have now to look at that exact same event and have kind of the more insight and knowledge that we have there. I said insight again, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overuse that word. So think about that. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. Be thinking that all sources have value and all sources have limitations, and you'll do okay. So OPVL, you should have homework for that tonight. Hopefully you're practicing it. So be ready to talk about it in class tomorrow. Have a good day.